time, and by every single time I mean the past few times, every single time I go to Bojangles,
Mm.
they do not have a chicken supreme combo to just give to me. I have to pull up and wait. But the thing is, the way that should be fresh, oh my God.
Oh
These
my,
go rounds, I was like, there has to be a garden in that restaurant because this
oh
is
my
freshly
God.
harvested, freshly fried. Oh my God, the crisp.
But
But of course,
okay,
like,
you gonna look at me crazy, but is that biscuits? Is that like tater tots?
they're tater tots, yeah, basically.
Oh, instead of the
They're huge
fries?
though. Yeah, because I was thinking, you know what, should I get fries or bow rounds? And I was like, I can have them all. I can have it. I can have both. But then I was like, Christina, you
Not too
be
much.
fucking for real. Be fucking for real.
Not too
And here I
much.
am. I've only eaten a couple of bow rounds, and since I kind of stopped for 10 minutes, getting situated, now I'm starting to get full. So I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah, this is exactly why I did not need to get two things of potatoes.
Lord.
I'm sorry if y'all can hear me munching. Probably still
You
annoying.
gotta do what you gotta do. I was about to finish off. I made like a frozen pizza, and it's not even regular frozen pizza. Aldi has these flatbread pizzas, and they're like cold section. It's by produce. So good. Like I add a little extra pepperoni, maybe some cheese, maybe a little Parmesan garlic powder if I'm feeling like zesty, but they're just so good. They just don't taste like frozen pizzas. They're like, I mean, it's a flatbread and it's not a frozen pizza because it's in the fridge section, but
Mm, I was gonna ask something about that.
all that ice in
Oh,
that cup.
how do
My
you like
pet
your flatbread?
peeve. I
I feel
just
like with the
I just put it like in the oven
do you like it
because it's like
crispy?
already made. No, I don't really like anything crunchy. I'll be honest with you. Like
Oh, right, right. We
I
talked
don't
about this
like it
before. Yeah.
like super soggy, but
Mm,
I don't want to feel like I'm eating a cracker. Like I don't like real
right.
crunchy pizza. So
I hate thin pizza. Like I want my shit doughy. I honestly do.
yeah, it depends. It depends. Like I'm gonna sound like a New York snob, but like the
Oh
pizzas
God.
unmatched. The pizzas unmatched. I'm so, like,
Okay.
so I found
Yeah.
three spots down here. Three spots down here in Raleigh that I'm like, okay, like y- you must have got somebody from the city in there, honestly, truly. And I'm gonna say their names. I'm gonna give them a little shout out. Tell them Chanel sent you. So Max's Pizza, um, on Creedmoor, not in Creedmoor, but like on Creedmoor in Raleigh. Mike's Pizza on New Bern, and Brothers Pizza in Cary. Elite. Do you understand? Elite. Like you got to carry me out that pizza place, kicking and screaming. But those are my top three. I don't know. Like, ugh, it's the perfect mix. It's not like I've had thin pizza from like Pizza Inn, which is like in Rocky Mount. Um, I've also had thin pizza from a place I think called like Mega Pizza or something. It tastes like the pizza is made on a tortilla. I'm like, hello? Like, what were you hoping to achieve? It's like it tastes like the pizza was made on an actual cracker. I'm just like, y'all are missing the mark. Y'all are missing the mark. Yeah, please. So I just feel like the New York City slice is a perfect mix where it's not like I don't like a doughy bread like pizza. I don't like pizza crust. Like something I used to do when I was younger. I don't really do it as much when I'm older now. Just eat my pizza backwards. I would eat
Oh
the
God.
crust first because I hated the crust the most. I'm like, why can't the pizza go to the end? Like
Fair.
just take it all the way to the end. And but I love the tip of the pizza. Like it just has all this flavor. Like so I eat my slices backward.
Okay.
I did.
I know the listeners are about to be like, "Do y'all talk about anything but food? Like besides food? Like,
Right.
please, please."
I mean, sometimes. Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. But I had to talk about this Bojangles because I was kind of annoyed. I was like, "This is the second time y'all have done this." But then I like to eat when I drive because
Yeah.
I don't know, I just don't like waiting and it's sitting there taunting
Same.
me. So I had a little bow round and I was like, "Oh my God,
Yo, eating in the
they just put this
car is top
top tier."
tier. Like My ex used to hate, like, once they hand that bag over, when I tell you my greedy, the point of view from the bag is just this. That's all they see because I'm like in it. He was like, "Oh, you gonna wash your hands first? You gonna sanitize?" I'm like, "Baby, like eating in the car. I don't know how to describe it. Like it is my favorite. The food tastes better. Like I don't know. I'm gonna get one thing about Chanel. She gonna get her bags from the drive-through and pull straight forward into a parking spot and eat. I do not
Mhm.
care. I do not care because y'all motherfuckers who wait till y'all get home, then y'all missing y'all sauce in the bag. Y'all missing y'all straw. No, everything needs to be sampled before while I'm in the parking lot. Because this way, if I'm missing
Right.
something, I just reverse and double back. Simple. It's all very straightforward. Like
You
I'm
especially
telling
have
you,
to do
like,
that at Cookout. Cookout will
Cookout is
fuck up your order in a
notorious.
heartbeat.
I also cooked out with a friend of mine. They forgot his milkshake. They forgot like the sauces. They forgot the straws. Luckily, I keep straws in my car. I keep straws and napkins and plastic forks in my car because you can't just be trusting restaurants to have you because they don't. And Cookout just don't be caring. And I kind of get it. I mean, it's 80 y'all in a cigarette box. Like, I'd be tight too. Like, every minute your ass brushing my ass, your back brushing my back, you breathe this on my neck. I get it. I get it. But not too much, right? Like, please.
Like I remember one
Please.
time I went I went with my ex a couple of months ago to Cookout, and we would really only go to Cookout, past 11 p.m. I don't know too many people who do it during the daylight.
Right.
And so anyway, obviously it was really busy, but the Cookout over, I think it's like on Falls and News, that one by like the TJ Maxx, is usually
Hmm.
pretty fast. Like the lines will be long as fuck, but you get in and out like in 15-20 minutes, which sounds like a lot,
Right.
y'all. But if y'all like haven't been to Cookout, that's actually pretty good.
Listen.
And so anyway, he pretty much always got the same exact thing, right? So I think the time before they had messed up my order somehow, so I made sure to look this time. And so anyway, we get to the apartment and everything. I put my shit up. I'm like, yep, correct, correct. I cannot wait to eat. He's like, okay, is the sauce in the bag? I'm like, what sauce? They got my barbecue sauce, but they don't got you nothing. And he was like,
Right.
okay, whatever. And then he opens the styrofoam container. Why did he not order a single fucking thing in that container? He ordered chicken, like the chicken or the cheese quesadilla, and they gave him chicken nuggets. Like they heard, and we're like, okay, yeah, no, I got it.
Right.
Yeah,
They heard a
I can guess.
C and was carried away. Like, we got it. No problem.
Oh my god, yeah, they are. I mean, they don't
I
make enough
hate
to like
that.
give
I
me
feel like
I'm
that's
like,
DoorDash. Like the way you will be ordering, like you'll order Starbucks through like Uber Eats or whatever. The way they'll pull up and just drop a Panera bag and go, and you're like, please, like what is this? And then you like, okay, you got to come back and get this. You call the restaurant. They're like, oh, it's between you and Uber Eats. The driver is like, that's between the restaurant and you. I'm like, please, like I can count on one hand the amount of times I've ordered from like a DoorDash, Postmates, Uber Eats, Grubhub situation because my patience is thin. Like
yeah.
I'm not about to play with y'all. Like you order like a whole 12-ounce steak, they throw a little 5 ounce in there and be like, hope for the best, figure it out. And I mean, what are you gonna do? I mean, you could dispute it, but I'm just like, you hungry still? You still want your steak? Like it just be no
Right.
care or nothing. It's very much like they stand across the restaurant and just eat it into the bag. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, okay, fine, that's cool.
Anyways, hi y'all. Clearly we're in a food type of mood. I hope y'all are doing well. I hope your week has been going well. We're actually recording this on Thursday, when usually we record on the weekend. So
Yeah,
it's kind of like a time fuck. But yeah, so
yeah, it feels fake
this might
odd.
be like a little, it might be like a little out of date for when you guys listen to it in 6 days. But yeah, we just figured we have some free time. We have stuff to talk about, so we're gonna get into it. So someone had actually listened to the podcast. It was really sweet of them. And they were like, oh, yeah, like, I really like this. And it's really nice and validating to hear about Black women's experience. I think she said, like, in the workplace or somewhere. And that pretty much inspired this current episode where we'll talk about being Black in the workplace. I don't know what else. I think Chanel, this is more like your brainchild, so you could probably like
Yeah, I
market it a
mean,
little better than I can.
essentially, yeah, like being a black woman in the workplace, um, and just I guess navigating how traumatic that can be, um, navigating like ways that it can like chip away at like yourself, your perception of how you're being perceived, um, navigating relationships with your coworkers, how they relate to work versus how you relate to work. So I'm just gonna kind of touch on different, I guess, different facets of it. Um, and yeah, because I'm sure most black women can relate. I mean, we all can relate to like you calling sick or like you get your hair done on the weekend or like you change it and like, okay, like, oh, okay, new hairstyle. And you're like,
Your
yeah,
hair grew so
always.
fast. I said, it
Right.
sure
Or they'd be
did. It
like,
grew
oh, how long did
23
that
inches.
take? Like, oh, wasn't that expensive? Like, oh, I don't know how y'all do that. Oh, but oh, it's so pretty. Like, oh, your braids are so pretty. I like wish that, I could do that, blah, blah, blah. Like you can't throw in your little two French braids and a little clip and call it a day, like not too much. So
Right. Like,
basically just
anyway,
like looking at
conversation
different
long.
right, different aspects of just being a black woman in a workplace. And I think Kris works more so in like tech. I work in healthcare and I've been in healthcare for a while. So we can kind of give our different takes on it. We're both at remote jobs. I'm relatively new at the job that I'm at. I've been there a few months. But I mean, even like when you have to like go into an office or when you have to like, you have like an on-site work location that you show up to, just a variety of things, like things that you consider like your style of dress or like again your
Mhm.
hair or the kind of jokes that you make. I think a lot of times what is, I don't know what the word would be, central or like a common denominator of being like a black woman in the workplace is you're like trying to scope out like what other black women are there and like if they're like you, for lack of better words.
Right.
You're like, okay, can I trust them? Like, are they like one of those, black people who like their job is their life? Like, it's hard to tell. It's very much like a little dance. But I think when you start a job, like you want to find your people. Especially as a black woman, most of the time that's other black women. Honestly, truly. I know with my job, within 3-4 weeks of training, um, we use Slack. So like I was slacking with this other black girl. We were kind of like, do you think this other black girl is cool? Like, do you think this other one is down? Not being like mean girly, but just trying to be like, okay, like who can we trust? You know what I mean? Like who can we trust? Like
Right.
who's what I call a mole, which is like, I mean, for lack of better words, like you ass kisser. Um, so I don't trust I could tell you something and it's not gonna like get back to management because and you kind of do it under the guise of like, oh, I was trying to help you out, but in reality you was trying to climb the ladder. You know what I mean? So all those things are essentially what we're going to touch on today.
So, as you were talking, it made me think about still being in that topic, but just going back really, really early
Mm,
and discussing where we develop our initial concept or relationship to work or labor. I was thinking it might be at the home based off of seeing how our parents or guardians, whoever, how their life is in relation to their work, or if it is more impacted by going to school, because that's also labor. It's also that's the work for a kid, is going to school, learning, coming home, doing homework.
right.
So I'm curious to know what you think as far as where we get that initial concept of what it means to work, whether
Right.
emotionally, as far as either emotionally, like severity, like how hard you have to work, if it's
Right.
like one or the other, or if it could be both, and if it is, then which one, like, what do you think what takes priority, or which one, I guess, in your experience, what was it?
So I think a few things factor into how we perceive work. And when I talk about work, I'm really speaking about not so much internal work, but like capitalism, right? Um, I think a few things play into how we look at working, how we relate to work environments. So, for example, I think part of it comes from your parent or guardian, right? Like, if you have a parent that, even if they're a nurse or whatever, like they work extremely long shifts, it limits the time they can see you. It limits the time that you spend with them, you bond with them. Um, they come home and they're like exhausted or they're grumpy or they're irritable. Your perception of work is going to be like, okay, like this is not a good thing, right? Like it takes away time, it makes you upset, it makes you irritable. And then it's hard because, and not saying parents gaslight their kids about this, but a lot of times it'll be like, well, we have to eat, those sneakers that you like to wear, those Jordans you like, those clothes you like to have on, that costs money. So like I need to work. So even if like a child is like, you work so much. Like, I miss you. I wish you could go to the park. That's the response. Then, quite naturally, as a child, your perception is like, okay, in order for me to have these nice things, like, I have to really, like, overextend myself and work really hard. And these things have to go on the back burner, right? So, like, it makes me think about, I mean, this might be like a stretch or like a tangent, but household dynamics where the man is the breadwinner. A lot of times they feel like, okay, like I pay the bills, I pay the rent, I make the money, like you need to take care of every single thing else, right? And a lot of times, like they're removed from emotional labor because they exercise so much physical labor, right? So it's like, yeah, like okay, when I come home, it's like, hi kid, pat you on the head, run you a bath, good night. Like when I've been working in like a warehouse for 12, 14 hours to make sure like our lights are on and you got lunch every day in your lunchbox, like I don't have time to like sit and roll around and play Legos with you. Like daddy's tired. You know what I mean? Like so I think part of that starts like your perception, like your relationship with what work is. But also, um, I think how soon you have to work. Like I know I worked once I went to college. Like I applied for work study before I went to college. I ended up not getting it, which was fine because I realized that work study had like a cap to it. Um, But I applied for my dining hall. I got in. I was working at some point at my dining hall. Like I was used to work like the grill. Um, I was working for my college newspaper as a copy editor, and then I was also working as they call like supplemental instructors, but basically like I was sitting on like an English class and I would like tutor later and like I don't know how to describe it, but it's basically like teaching English to it's called EOP. Um, but that's what I was doing for a little bit. So I was at some point in college and I was double majoring. So I'm double majoring, taking the maximum credits, which at the time was like 21, right? I was in a relationship. I was working the three jobs. So I wasn't really partying. I wasn't really like doing a social thing in college. It was very much like getting my paperwork as far as my diplomas go and working because I needed money while I was in college. I mean, and we all know like when you're in college, you get like the fat refund check and like nobody can tell you shit, right? Like you wake up to six bands and you're like, I might not even show up to class. You might not even see me in Spanish. Like 6,000,
Right.
please. But I was working early. So I feel like I got burnt out from working early. Um, because basically you realize, okay, I need to work in order to survive. Even if it's not something I want to do, something I like doing. And different people have different work views, right? So like some people, their job is an extension of who they are, who they believe themselves to be, what they're into. But other people are like, I am here to make my money and go, right? And I think that's something that I struggled with even after I graduated college. It took me a few years before I had a job in my degree field. And I was having like an actual crisis about it because I'm like, I went to college, I busted my ass, and I have these diplomas that I can't even utilize. I owe all this money for no reason. Like when I left college, my first job was Kohl's. I was working there part time, $8.50, $9 an hour. And I was when I graduated college, I was 21. I had just turned 21 like the year before. I graduated in May and my birthday was in December. So I was 21. I had this like retail shitty job. Um, so I was like not feeling it. It wasn't like, oh, like the world is my oyster, like life is great, you know? Um, and that kind of started my, I guess my relationship, my like uphill battle of like being like, okay, like I need to make more money. Like I want to utilize my degrees. And I wasn't even thinking to myself like, do I want to utilize my degrees? Right? Like I just on default, it's like, okay, I went to college because you're told to go to college, right? And I have this paperwork and I should be using it. Only for me to later on, I worked in using my English and my psych degree, and I was like, I don't want to do neither of these things. Um, so yeah, I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I do feel like as far as your relationship with work, it's like you seeing like your parents, right? Like how they navigate work, or even not even just your parents, but even other adults. Like, say your teacher is like, I love my job as a teacher. I love spending time with you guys. Like, I love it. Then you're like, oh, okay, work is something you can love, and it can be two conflicting perspectives because you're like, okay, like also like as a kid being like, what do you want to do when you grow up? Like, it's already ingrained in you to be thinking about career, thinking about like it's not even like what do you want to do when you grow up, right? Like it's like what do you want to be? So if you're like I want to be a vet, I mean a veterinarian is a career, right? So it's like it's this weird dynamic because you're like okay, like this is what I should aspire to. And then you might get there, you might be unhappy, but you're like I've wanted to do this my whole life, right? So those are all things that to me factor in.
Right, right. I think it definitely is like a mix of um, a lot of things, but that's like with most things. I think
Right,
also the way school is both champion and it's meant to be prioritized, like it's encouraged basically,
right,
but it also breeds this expectation that you your efforts while expected are not really appreciated because they're expected. So it's like
right,
um some family, for instance, the kid might come back and it's like, oh, I got an A, and it's like, of course you did, you're supposed to. So it
yeah,
also, I think, can breed this weird relationship towards labor in that you're now trying to get validation in some sense, whether
right,
that's now from the teacher, from your peers, from your parents, from your boss.
right,
So I think school also plays a role, and that's where we actually practice labor and really develop our muscle towards labor. And I think that's also where we are also. I think that's also where we are. What's the word I'm looking for? I think this is where it is signaled to us who is who is important
mm,
and who is not. So by the
mm,
time you're in high school, and it probably depends on like what school you go to, but I want to say in general, when you're in high school, there's a lot of talk about college or taking the right classes, whether that's honors or AP or IB. And for those who don't know like what AP or IB classes are, those are basically just college level classes that high school students can take in order to get college credit. They take a test. If they get a high enough mark, then they can have that count as college credit and they won't have to take it when they are a freshman. So, anyway, at least in my school, it was very clear when they were starting to make the distinction between the the honors kids and the quote unquote regular kids. And so I feel like that in a way signals this sort of classist understanding of okay, if I am in this group, I'm better. If I'm in this group, then I'm not good enough, so why even try? So I think that also just plays into effect, just not like with how often we go to school or how much time we spend in school rather, but also just how our teachers even communicate to us and tell us what type of labor is important, because a teacher could be like, "Oh yeah, you're so good when you do projects that require what are those things called? Like the trifolds. You're really good at this." But when it's time to actually apply to college, you're not going to be really encouraged to expand on that artistic ability necessarily. It's very much going to be, well, yeah, you're good at it, but
Right.
you have to make a career. So
Yeah.
I think school plays a role as well in like a slightly different way, maybe than watching your parents or guardians growing up.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm actually watching Abbott Elementary right now, and the episode that I recently watched yesterday, basically they were trying to instill like a gifted and talented program. I mean, I don't want to give the show away because I'm still watching it myself, but basically one of the teachers was like, they were like, yeah, when I was younger, like I was made to feel like I wasn't part of the like elite kids basically, and that made me not even want to like try, which is understandable. I mean, I've kind of always been academically above my peers. I remember being in second grade and I was damn near like the student teacher. Shout out to Miss Lyons, my second grade teacher. Wait, but anyway, like she was giving me like third grade level work. To almost like challenge me. Not that I would get like disruptive because I wouldn't. I just wasn't that kind of kid. But I was bored. Like I would breeze through what was being given to me. So I'd like kind of go around and help my peers or whatever. But I just feel like it's it's hard because it's like there are going to be kids who are above their peers, knowledge wise. I mean, it just is going to be the case. And there's going to be kids who are below. But I feel like once the kids who are not like on par are made to like understand, like, oh shit, like I'm the stupid one. Like I'm with the slow kids. You know what I mean? Like they're like, wait, like um, I'm not being like pulled out the classroom to do these special classes or like given an award, right? Um, like once they're made aware of that, like it does something self-esteem wise. So you bring up a good point. I mean, also as far as like when you when you soar academically and your parent kind of makes you feel like, okay, like this is what you're supposed to do anyway. Um, then like your relationship with achievement kind of becomes thwarted. And it's okay, like am I like basically the bar you set for yourself is like to always be that way. And then when you're not, it's like a huge blow. You're like, oh my goodness, but like that's who I was. And like when I was younger, I wanted to be a writer. I remember like being like, yeah, I want to be a writer. And I was told like I wouldn't make enough money doing that. Like it was like you're gonna be starving. Um, and I was like, oh, I don't want that. Because I kind of grew up like not like poor, but I wasn't like rich. It wasn't like, oh, I want this from the store. You know, it very much was not that at all. So I was like, okay, like I don't want to be broke. So I was like, okay, let me try different avenues. So I added a psych degree in college. I initially just started out with English because I was like, I don't care. Like I want to be a writer. That's what I want to do. Whatever. I like wanted to go to Columbia in New York. Like that was like what I wanted to do. Um, So yeah, I think like I think it's like so multifaceted because it's not just your relationship with like work, but also like what's ingrained in you as far as like the importance of like money or like the importance of like finances. Because you're like if you want to be something and your mom is like, oh well, you know, you should be a doctor or a lawyer because they make good money. And it's told to you enough, whether or not you actually want to be that, if you're told that early enough in life, long enough, you're kind of going to start bending yourself to that, right? You're like, okay, well, I want my parents to be proud of me and I can make good money.
Yeah, a couple of things came to mind while you were talking. One is this idea, at least in American culture, that good enough is not actually good enough.
Right,
Excellence is the bare minimum. Excellence is the expectation. If you
right.
get a B, it's like, okay, next time let's make that an A. If you get
Yeah,
an A, it's like, okay, well next time let's make that an A plus. Even if you get a B minus or a C plus, very much average, has a, at the very least basic understanding and working knowledge of the material, it's
mm,
still looked down upon. And it's this idea that while we are taught in this culture to avoid failure at all costs, it sometimes
right,
almost feels like being average is the worst thing of all. Because I guess by the time you fail, you know, okay, well, no one expects anything from me anymore. Whereas if you're just quote unquote average, people are thinking like, okay, well, even more, like why are you teetering on the line? Like, do better, do better, do better.
right,
Um, so yeah, I feel like there's definitely this baseline of needing to be excellent, and I think that expectation increases depending on what what kind of area you grow up in. So if you grow up in a very
right,
rough area or a very poor area, then the kids have to they can't coast like maybe some of the kids at the wealthy schools can, because the expectations at the poor or rough school neighborhood is already so low. So while me
right,
being a C or a B average student in like inner city Philadelphia is not the same as me in suburban Durham going to Durham Academy, a private school.
right,
So, and because of that, I think anytime we talk about class, we also have to bring race into the discussion, at least when talking about American culture. And so when you're talking about the fact that depending on your socioeconomic status within your family, your neighborhood, and
right.
within your school, race is going to factor in inevitably.
Yeah,
And so then you get into the conversation of how Black people are expected to excel. And so there's this concept of what I just explained where by default in American culture, good enough is not good enough. Excellence is what is expected. It's the bare minimum, and you might not even be praised for it because it's
right,
expected. Two, that need to be excellent becomes surmounted depending on if you are in an area where you have to overcompensate to quote unquote make
mm,
it or to make it out. And then you add on the layer of race. In this case, we're just going to talk about Black people because we're Black. Um,
surprise.
And so then that increases it, not just
Right,
because of those other two or three factors that I mentioned, but because
mm,
of this cultural relationship that American society and really the world, but we'll talk about American society specifically, has
right,
with Black people and Black people's labor. So because it's a really weird hypocritical dichotomy. While the stereotype is that Black people are lazy, all this other stuff, um, and that almost makes it so that the bar that they put on us is low. Um, and so, in order to prove ourselves, we have to overcompensate a little more. Just be like, no, see, I can do the same thing. And it's like, okay, well,
Right.
of course, like you can do the same thing. You're not special. Like, why would I praise you for doing what the white person can do? And it's like, okay, well, I'll go above and beyond to really show it. And it's like, okay, you think I'm just gonna praise you because you're black and you're smart? So
Right.
it's also like going back to that school thing when we were talking about having this weird relationship with labor and a need for validation. But that's kind of a side tangent. I think all this conversation about needing to be excellent and that just compounding based off of um, like where you are financially, geographically, racially, that all becomes even more potent, even though it might not be as valued. I think an
Right.
excellent black student in inner city Philadelphia might not get the same opportunities or won't necessarily be praised as much. It might even be discouraged as opposed to a wealthy white kid in, I don't know, in some private school in Connecticut.
Right.
But yeah, that was, I don't know if that made any sense, but that's just what came to mind when we're talking about like excellence and what it means to actually be successful when it comes to work um and yeah. Um Besides that, I wrote down a little earlier what actually counts as work. I know you were
Mm.
saying when we were talking about the family dynamics where if one parent is the breadwinner and the other parent stays at home, it can create this weird power imbalance.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think that is definitely something to be explored. Because
Mm.
is it one, the fact that it's a certain labor that is being prioritized, or is it the fact that it is prioritized because it actually has monetary value? So yeah.
Yeah. I think the latter. I mean, to a certain extent, it's both because yeah, it is a certain type of labor being prioritized, and it's again because it has financial gain. So, oh well, we need a place to live. Like the lights need to be on. This, that, and the third. So a man paying rent. I'm saying this is like the existing belief amongst many men. A man paying rent takes precedence over like a woman being at home all day with a newborn baby. Oh well, he sleep most of the day, so really you just kind of like walk around and you get to watch TV and I'm on the construction site or like I have to like meet with clients all day and I'm tired and you guys to lay down and it's definitely I don't know if the word would be like discounted um what the mother is doing um or even like I feel like there's also times where type of work is like pit up against each other. So, oh well, I'm a lawyer. Like you just design house. Like you just like interior decorate. So like my job
Right.
is more important than like your job. Like who makes that rule, right? Um. So yeah, that's something that I definitely do feel like uh because to a certain extent, I guess like with you, financial is more tangible. Um. That for example, the work that like mothers do is overlooked, or um, just like jobs that people feel are like, oh, this job is, oh, you walk dogs, like okay, like that's not really a job. That's I have a career. You just have a job. Career versus
Right.
job, like that becomes a different dynamic. Excuse me. Um, so yeah, that's something that I definitely noticed.
What did you want to talk about as far as work or labor relates to Black women in those spaces?
Yeah, so I mean, I can phrase it with like just asking you a question. Like how when did you first start working? Let's start there. What are some jobs that you've had where you've noticed your blackness or that you as a black woman specifically, like even if you had like black male counterparts. When have you noticed, like, okay, me being like a black woman, like, is setting me apart in this type of way?
Okay. So the first part, I'm not sure which question I want to answer first. I think I'll answer the second one first. So I think with the second one, it kind of goes back to what we were talking. No, we actually didn't talk about this. That was in my head. It reminds me of what I was thinking a couple minutes ago, as far as what counts as work. We were talking about that.
Right.
So depending on your definition, whether work is just something that you get paid to do or something that produces value,
Mm,
um, or if it's anything really involving labor or effort or some combination of those. So I think that it can be like a really broad answer. As far as what I think the closest thing to a job I had at like the earliest was probably around high school, just because I took so many advanced classes that I really didn't have any ability to do anything else. And so I want
right.
to bring that up because where I went to school, when you're in these honors and AP classes and you're mixed with the white kids who came from the private Catholic school,
Yeah.
and who don't really need to worry about trying too hard, but do it anyway. When those are your peers, and it's just clear like the expectations between you and them is kind of different.
Mm,
And then even at least like for me in the way students interact with each other, I feel like it was always from what I saw, and it could just be because like I'm a shy and awkward person. If those crowds ever were diversified in any realm, it was never by like other quote unquote smart or gifted black kids. They were always black kids who were not in those classes, but who were cool to hang out with, that kind of
mm,
thing. Um, so yeah, I think there's that, and then also just not really seeing myself in those classes, and even in a way being overlooked, but also feeling like I stood out a lot. So it's one thing if you
mm,
like just raise your hand because you have an opinion on the book you're reading in English class, but it's another when it's Huckleberry Finn. You're one of three black girls. You're talking
yeah.
about slavery, racism. I can't remember if Huckleberry Finn was. I think Huckleberry Finn is pre Antebellum. Um, and all the white kids are having this discussion, and because of your lived experiences as a black person, they're missing a bunch of topics, like a lot of
Right.
nuances. So instead of it just being like, oh, actually this is what I think, even outside of being like maybe uncomfortable because you have the dissenting opinion, but it's like the fact that you are also black, quote unquote, speaking out of
Right.
turn. I think that, and then you're a woman on top of it. So I think there was just like very subliminal signals.
Mm,
And some were more apparent. Like I remember, like I said, in my English class, there were three black girls, including me. We, we did not look alike in the slightest. We didn't hang out with the same people. And so I was talking to my English teacher about something after class. And I was like, okay, thanks, so and so. And he was like, yeah, okay, bye, Alex. And I was like, did you just call me Alex? And Alex was like another black girl. I was like, I don't even communicate with the same people that she
right.
communicates with. Like she does that with with white kids. Not that there's anything wrong,
Right.
but I'm like, our groups are not the same.
Right.
So yeah, that was kind of like this idea of like what working in a shared space kind of
Yeah.
did, and like what vibe that gave me. As far as my first job, so my first job was in high school. I worked at a daycare, um, and I remember there was also another girl in my grade who worked there too. We just worked in different classrooms, and this girl was like spicy white, like one of those girls, kind of like a Kylie Jenner, Kim Kardashian kind of white, where it's like, oh, they're not white, they're tan, and you know that kind of
Right,
dark hair.
right. They're Persian. Like, girl,
Right.
white passing,
And
hush.
so I think this girl might have been Greek or like Italian
Okay.
or something, very much like Mediterranean type vibes, but
Yeah.
a tanned white person.
Right.
Um, and she also hung out with that crowd I was telling you about, where it's like just the wealthy, rich white kids that are all going to apply to the same 5 schools. Um, we both worked at the same daycare, different classes,
Mm,
whatever, whatever. In the classroom I worked in, the main teacher was an African woman. And I remember her saying something to me about like the manager of the daycare praising the white girl, just like randomly being like, oh, you know, she's so pretty and like
right.
she's such a nice girl and everything. And I can't remember like what the main teacher in my classroom said, but I know she kind of called her out
Mm,
like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, what does that have to do with like the work she does? And she's like, you don't say
right.
that about anyone else. You don't say that about Kris. And they basically do the exact same job, just with different ages. Very much this like idolization of her. And I was never like
Mm,
talked down on or anything, but also like I was never really around her at the job, so I can't really compare. But from that, I understood, and I even at 17, I knew like, okay, well, I know why this is. Um, but yeah, so that was the first job that I guess I kind of had, but then I didn't really have another official job until out of college, and I remember when I had interviewed a couple of months before I joined, I had braids in my hair. And then I had been waiting for like months to hear something. So eventually I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to do whatever the hell I want with my hair. I wanted to cut it. So I did. And then, of course, I got the job. And I remember in the back of my head, I was just kind of thinking, oh no, what am I going to do? Because they saw me with like long braids and now I have short hair.
yeah.
Um, so, so yeah, that's like a a long tangent, but in short, I think it's like for me at least a mix of how you're seen, how you're communicated in comparison to your peers, your white peers, non-black peers, whoever, um, and then also your blackness explicitly will come into play, and then this comes down to the acceptable versions of blackness. Like I'm pretty sure if I had Alicia Keys hair, I wouldn't really care like that. But it's the fact that my hair is not like that, so it was an added stressor. But yeah, I feel like I'm going on a tangent, but yeah, that's my long-winded answer to that. Um, do you have any experience where you were kind of like, oh, okay, when I'm in a
Um,
workplace, it's going to be different for me?
so I've worked a variety of jobs. One of my jobs, I had worked at,
Hi, y'all. Some technical
yeah.
difficulties, but we're back.
We're back. Um, so I remember working at this pre-K as a teacher assistant, and long story short, I ended up getting fired from that job. But I was very aware that there were no other black teachers there. Right before, like during my interview process, there was the assistant manager of the center was like a black woman, but she was leaving for some reason. And then the only other black woman was the owner's daughter, but there was no other black women or black people working for the center. And it was in a pretty affluent area. So I honestly, North Carolina's at will. So when I was fired, it wasn't really like a, oh, like this is why. It was just like, oh, we don't think you're a good fit, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, cool, okay, whatever, no problem. But that was a job where I was aware that early on, it's hard to describe it, but for the most part, I have a very like reserved, straightforward tone. And I wasn't like, okay, Aiden, like, have a good day. Like, hello, mom. I didn't have this like over the top, like bubbly, like peppy way. And I worked at another pre-K, and I do feel like that's something that was held against me. Was just like not having that tone. I also have a deeper voice. So my voice combined with just like my natural tone, um, I feel like parents were kind of just like, okay, like I don't know what to make of this woman. The other place I worked at, there was more, black women working there. But I think I feel I don't know how to describe it, but there's a lot of times where I've worked a job as like for example, a server at like a nursing home, essentially is what it was. And all the serving staff were black, but like the owner of the place is white. And when I notice dynamics like that, I'm uncomfortable because I'm like, why are like basically at the bottom of the totem pole, so like the most labor for the least amount of money, why are black people occupying those rungs? And I mean, we had I think a black housekeeper, a Caribbean housekeeper, a black person who worked in like the wellness sphere of things. But I am hyper aware when I apply to a job, when I enter any kind of job space, even if it's somebody else's job, I am very aware of what roles the black people are occupying, how I feel like they're treated, um, their dynamic with those who occupy higher rungs, like whether the respect is there or not. So I've worked at a good bit of jobs where I've been like, I mean, honestly, being straightforward, this feels like a plantation. Like I literally said it, like this feels like a plantation. And I felt uncomfortable and I ended up leaving because I'm just like, like, no. Because soon after I'm made aware of, okay, like this is strange. Like all your all your serving staff is black people. And I'll notice that the treatment of the staff, for example, is like bottom tier, right? So like when I was a server, it'll predominantly white people in the nursing home. They'll like want something and they're like tapping their fork against their glass. I've heard them like calling like male servers like boy. Like this is a grown man. You know what I mean? Like this he's like 25. Like why are you calling him boy? We wear name tags. So it's like oh you being a funny guy. Um so yeah, I have noticed. But what I wanted to like hone in on, like zoom in on is just what has been your experience as a black woman in tech? I've known a few black women who kind of are in like STEM in general fields, and a lot of times those spaces are not occupied by like the amount of black people in those spaces are not high. So,
Mhm.
what has been your experience? Um, how do you feel about? I mean, obviously you don't have to like call out your job or anything like that, but what do you feel like your treatment has been like? How's your interactions been with like your management as well as just like your coworkers on the day to day?
Mhm. So, what was the first question? How is
I
it
was
being a
saying,
black
what
woman
has
in
been
tech?
your yes?
Okay, so the first question, I think it's important for me to mention that I have not been in a tech role for very long. I have been at a, I guess, tech company for a couple of years, but that's also the only job I've had outside of college. And I also did not go to school for anything technology related. I was still in STEM, but I was not nowhere near the tech, computer science, any type of space. I just I'll save everyone a story. I just happened upon it, not really serendipitously at my job, but it was a small company where your gifts can stand out and make room for you. They did. Here I am a couple years later. So I think all of that is important context because probably the experience another Black woman has in tech, while it's not necessarily going to be the same as mine, exactly, it's probably going to be a little bit different when they have been in that sphere since around like 18, 19, as opposed to me
Right.
um, being more so just like in the industry, not really in the role.
Right.
And even though I'm in the role now, it's still very early days. But I think there's also an outlier situation where the manager I first started with is a Black woman. She's only a couple years older than me, and she was very protective of me. She was like very like no nonsense, very chill, Virgo queen. Um, and so I think because of that, like people knew like one, not to fuck with me, and
Yeah.
two, people knew like, okay, well, when you come across my manager, even outside of the manager being Kris's uh, manager, you need to approach her, like my manager, a certain way as well.
Right.
So I think one, there was the added layer of protection, and two, I had the benefit of being able to watch another Black woman who was a couple years older than me um, interact a space, like a tech space, basically, in a way that was not obviously compromising of who she was as a Black woman. Um, and then when I got a different manager, this time it was a white woman, but this is like, I think there might be three white women like her in the world. So we were already friends before that. But then she became my manager. And she's very insightful, very self aware, very knowledgeable, just has like a very intersectional lens, not just as it relates to race, but like intersectionality overall. Um, so I also felt a certain level of protection and like my guard was able to be down.
Okay.
Um, and so I feel like that for the first couple of years, I was able to have this certain privilege in being able to have a certain candor or to show up at work when we're remote a certain way. With my Black manager, if I am having my one-on-one with her and I'm deep conditioning and I have a Food Lion bag on my head, no one cares. Even with my white manager, um, it's like it's not a big deal. So it wasn't really until like this year maybe when I kind of started to feel like, okay, now I have to really kind of like how you were saying, suss out what's what.
Yeah.
So I think it will be like this moving forward, where as kind of you were saying, once you get out of certain spaces that are historically and even currently disproportionately given or filled by Black people, you get into spaces where there's even less of you, but it's not always white people. Now, like in this more tech oriented space, I am still like the only Black woman, but it's even more apparent because I don't have any Black peers, male or female. But the racial dynamics are also different. So instead of it just being like all white, now there's a higher proportion of Asian coworkers. Um, and anyone who's like familiar with the race dynamics or the racial groupings and hierarchy in America, and I saw this today actually when I was doing a slide deck. Um, White people and Asian people are are grouped together. Like if white people can only be grouped with one race, they're going to be grouped with Asian people, and not just any Asian people, obviously the the East Asians, because no one wants to be around brown people, and everyone else, it's like Black and Hispanic people are their own grouping. So
Right.
even though there are more people of color, technically, um, I don't feel any safer. I don't feel
Right.
any more seen. Now, if there were like just more people and it wasn't like
Mm.
obvious why the room looks the way it does, might be a different story. But I feel like my experience in tech has just been very unrealistic, honestly.
Mm.
Um, and it's still very, very early for me being in this tech role. But while I have not had really, I guess, any problems with my current manager, who's a white man, I now feel this additional pressure to not mess up.
Mm.
So I'm basically learning how to do my job on the job, but not in a, hey, we're gonna like do a 3 month new hire training program. More so just like, all right, well, you're gonna practice with actual projects and hopefully you get it right, which can be quite daunting. But when you know that and have
Right.
seen firsthand how women or Black people or people of color, women of color, can very easily be discounted and I'm trying to think of the word, maybe not criminalized, but their their performance is even more, it has to be like even more perfect, then that's where in the back of my mind I start thinking like, okay, well, now I don't know who's watching me. I don't know if certain expectations are out in the open, but no one's communicating them with me. Because even at my company, there there was just like a thing where the psychological safety amongst the people of color was so low in our like company surveys, and a lot of them, not just from the survey but from people I communicated with who had white managers, especially white female
Mm.
managers, were in some really shady situations. So I think there's a lot of similarities regardless of the industry that you're in, but I also don't think I've gotten like high up enough to really be able to tell anything. But it seems that even as I continue to progress, I'm not likely to see more of me. And if
Mm.
I am, and I'm like still in the same tech industry, I'm not likely to see them in the kind of role that I'm in. They're probably going to be more like customer service focused. Um, and they pretty much are always very composed, very, this is for Black women, very composed, very, just matter of fact, like not too harsh, not too bubbly, that kind of thing.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I don't think it's necessarily anything like specific to tech, but like I was saying, for the past however many minutes, I think my experience in tech has been, oh my God, this lighting, um, has been different than most. So that probably wasn't helpful for y'all because I wasn't even trying to get here 5 years ago, but here I am. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah. And what was the second part of your question?
My memory is not worth anything, honestly.
Mine isn't either.
I actually remember this. How do you navigate interactions? Like, have you ever felt your blackness in interactions with management or higher up supervisors, as well as coworkers?
What about the interaction?
Have you ever have you felt like hyper aware of your blackness in those interactions? Like for example, like
Um,
recently in like our Slack chat at work, like people were like, "Oh my gosh, like R.I.P. the Queen," and I'm like, you know what I mean? Like, or they'll be like,
yeah,
"Today was the day women got to vote," and I'm like, watch
white
it."
women.
You know what I mean? Like, So
Yeah,
moments like
so
that where it's like, this is tone deaf.
yeah, so I think there are a lot of instances like that when politics comes into play.
Mm, mm,
Um, I think me being black and being a woman at the same time has something to do with that, but I think me also being very, very into that sphere makes me even like more hyper aware when someone is tone deaf, and then I also have a lot less patience for it.
yeah.
Um, but outside of the politics thing, I will say like my hair is like the biggest thing where I I feel like that's the most quote unquote unprofessional part of me, or that's the part that's most easily judged.
Mm,
Um, I think in my interactions, and I think this is just like honestly with white people in general, I am not as just I'm not as candid with them. So it's also this balance of trying to figure out how I get to live as myself, but also not hurt the white people's feelings.
mm,
Because I understand what people mean when they say like work is not my end all be all. I'm there to just get a job done and leave. For me, I don't like anything that dissociated. Like if I feel like I
mm,
have to just go in there and be tunnel visioned and just leave, I'm annoyed. Um, so I also just refuse to a certain extent to be buddy buddy, to be cutesy. I've never had a problem with it so far because my
right.
coworkers have been cool. And then also, like I said, I had decent managers. As far as politics goes, and this was really more so around the start of since the start of the pandemic. Um, it's not necessarily my interactions with these people because
Mm,
I don't tend to get into that. It's more so like what I have been exposed to or what I've seen. Um, and it's more so like the interactions amongst non-black women. So when the George Floyd protests were going on, I remember in our like ladies of the office Slack channel, the women were talking about like, oh, this is so wild. Like I don't know how to talk to my children about interactions with the police, and I'm like, not that black people are the only one who have problems, but you're Indian, so like why like this is not the time and place. Like why are you freaking out right now?
right, right, right.
Like you're in the middle of this, you're saying on Slack, wow, how am I going to talk to my kid about this? Like honestly, you don't fucking have to. You really don't.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just annoying. It's like this misplacement of
yeah.
allyship. Um, and then the disbelief is
Mm.
what is the annoying part. Um, and
Oh
I
my
think
God,
when you're
yeah.
around people who are so ignorant, it's almost like a form of gaslighting because you're thinking, am I the
Yes.
only one who sees this?
Right, right.
Um, but but yeah, I would say usually like in my hair or like the way I look, I think
Okay.
sometimes I will like reword things, not because I say it in a bad way, but
Mm,
because I'm like, if I'm trying to figure something out, I'm not really gonna be talking like all bubbly like I might if we're talking about cookies and Bojangles. But because of that, especially if I'm not comfortable, but because of that, I know like, okay, I might seem a certain way. So let me figure out how to rephrase this.
right.
So yeah, I would say that's more so like my interactions where I like really recognized my blackness. It's more so just like non-black people not having any sort of experience or nuance. Um, yeah, I would say that's it. There have been interactions with like people who are, I guess, black, who are like mixed.
Yeah.
Um, but that's a side tangent. It's very much giving like the colorism aspect.
Right.
But yeah, that's like that's been my experience. Um, I think I have like a couple of notes here. Let's see. Oh, actually, something that I was curious about was, um, and this would probably be like my last question that I ask you specifically. Um, when it comes to the performativeness that you have to pursue and
Mm.
master in pretty much all interactions, but especially in the workplace, do you think you have to be, or have rather, have you had to be more performative when going into a physical space to perform your job, or when working from home, and why,
Mm.
depending on which one you pick?
Um, I feel like definitely in person I've had to. Um, I feel like I thought I heard something. I feel like with working from with working from home, I mean you can turn your camera off. You can like disguise it better almost. I don't really jump into Slack. Here and there I will. They might put like an icebreaker. And I might say what I have to say. But a lot of things I very much it's kind of like water off a duck's back. Like I'm like I'm not even gonna touch those grounds. I work for like this healthcare company, and one of my coworkers essentially was sharing like, oh, like who loves South Park? And I'm like,
Mm.
are we an organization that like is supposed to be like forward thinking and like trauma informed and like what's the word, harm reduction? Like, why would you ask that? South Park? I'm looking at her like white woman. I'm like, hush. So I wanted to comment and be like, we still watching this show? But I'm like, Chanel, it's just some tussles you like, I'll sit this one out, right? I've
Right.
had times in meetings where like a manager or like a higher up, a suit, will say something, and I do this thing when it's just something that's bizarre to me. I do like a villain laugh, like ha, like I'm like it's like a maniac, right? Because I'm just like, wow, this is like actually perplexing. Like, are you serious? So I'll be in a meeting just like shaking my head and laughing, and I'll just turn my camera off. Like when I feel like my head about to spin around, I'm like, okay, Chanel, you on one. Like let me just turn that camera off really quick. I gotta get my lighting together. My power went out, y'all. But what was I gonna say? This is my second comment.
You're basically talking about how like white people are very carefree and blasé in their interactions with work.
What's what's, what's going on, y'all? Yeah, I don't know what's going on. We just gonna let that rock. But I also have noticed, like, I feel like my white counterparts identify more with the work they do in the sense that, like, it's like part of their personality, right? And they more so with like the workplace, they're like, I hate how dark it is. They're like, oh, like my I don't want to say my actual job's name, but like, oh, my like mannequin family, like good morning mannequin family, like they like share pictures of their kids and they like drop icebreakers and they like comment on like other people's posts. It's very much like a camaraderie that I personally don't feel safe doing because I don't trust jobs, right? Um, I don't trust that they won't use something like I'm experiencing against me. Like, oh, your performance we've noticed like has kind of been like deteriorating. Like, we remember you kind of spoke about like, being really anxious or like your depression was getting bad. Like the way I want to shoot, like, no. Even like people who like cry at jobs. I'm like, stand up. Like the way my job will never see me drop a tear, like because you're not gonna hold that against me, right? You're not gonna be like, oh, she's going through a lot, and that might be why. So I feel like, and I mean, I've talked to other Black women in my workplace, And I actually have like a group chat with like some girls, because we all kind of like would notice the same thing, and we wanted each other to like lean on and to have a space where we feel like supported and like validated. Um, and I feel like a lot of times when you try to share things with your white counterparts, they might not feel the same, they might not perceive it the same way. And then you could kind of feel like gaslit, right? Like, oh, well, I don't think that's what they were trying to do. And you like, bitch, right? You like, because Tamara would have never said no stupid shit like that. Like, she would have been like, yeah, bitch, I know this. I peeped. And you would have been like, ah, that's what I want to see.
Right.
So I just personally feel like there is and we've kind of had this conversation, there is a mistrust of jobs, understandably so. Because I mean, I'm sure everyone at some point has witnessed a job do some shady shit. My first job, yeah, my first job ever was Burger King, and I was there for 2 or 3 weeks only. I was in the training phase. My drawer was short, and they were basically like, "You need to pay the like discrepancy to continue working." And I'm like, "But I didn't take any money. I have cameras. Look at the cameras." I'm like, people were training me, so there was multiple people who was like going back and forth and not, locking the drawer because they were trying to train. And girl, they would not budge. And again, I'm a Sagittarius, so bitch, you not budging, I'm not budging. And I left. Here, take your little raggedy ass uniform. Bye. Goodbye. Farewell. I don't care if it was 15 cents. Yeah, not getting it. Because I'm also CEO of It's the Principal. So I know I didn't steal that money. You don't want to check the cameras? That's on you. You take over my shit. How about that? But I say all that to say I feel like um black women in the work, like we don't feel heard. We feel like, oh, like once we say something, like it's like, oh, you think it's about this or you think it's about that. I've had a job that I essentially quit. I've only been fired once, y'all, but I've essentially quit because I would wear like a head wrap, kind of like what Chris had in the last episode, and they were telling me I couldn't wear it. And they were like, oh, in the handbook, it's in the handbook. And I said, no, the handbook says you can't have like an unnatural hair color, so like pink hair, and you can't wear hats. And I said, this is neither. And this big fat sloppy white man was like, I'm not gonna argue with you. I'm not holding another meeting for. And I said, okay, well, your fat ass can take over my shift. And I left. Because again, most of your serving staff is black. If my hair was unruly and I had like dandruff falling out of it, and this, second, and third, my hair wasn't, you know, that would have been a problem. It would have been an issue about professionalism and presentation and the standards of the company and me upholding that as an employee. So I'm like, you throwing a tantrum about a turban, a headscarf? They were like, oh, if it's not for a religious reason, and like I feel like at a certain age, like I'm not gonna lie, at my big old age, I'm damn near 30 years old. I'm not gonna say, oh yeah, I wear this because it's for it's not. I'm wearing this because my hair looks like big dick dog shit beneath it, and that's it. Simple. I'm like, there hasn't been any complaints from like the residents that live here or whatever. Like, oh, it doesn't matter. It was this whole thing, and girl, I just quit. I was like, forget it. Like, I don't have the patience. I don't have the time. So I say all that to say, I think I'm always hyper aware of how I exist in a space, especially because, again, I'm not like a really like peppy, like perky, like black woman. Um, I'm pretty blunt. I'm pretty straightforward. I don't like sugarcoating. I don't like ass kissing, and I don't like performance. I hate performance in any aspect. Like not even just in the job sphere, but dating, like friendships, like if I'm with my homegirl and she like talks to a dude and her voice like drops like it goes up several like octaves, I'm looking at her like, did you swallow something? Like, why are you doing that? Like, why? What's going on? Why are you doing that? That's weird, right? Like, I don't like
Mm,
feeling like in order to be accepted in a space, I have to be how they want me to be. Um, even as far as like I used to like dress up for job interviews and I just stopped. Now I'm not gonna pull up to a job interview in like jeans. The Gen Z, like these youngins, like I've seen them pull up in crop tops. I've seen them pull up in the straight rainbow club wear. I'm like, oh, I'll wear like maybe like leggings and a blouse, but like I don't put effort because I'm like, you're gonna get what you get. Like if you're hiring me and you're trusting in my skill and you feel like I'll be a good fit to perform the job, it shouldn't matter like, oh, she got a little short afro. Like what will the people that come to the front desk think? You know what I mean? Like if that's your concern, I don't want to be in this kind of workspace anyway. Simple
Do
as
you
that.
feel a higher pressure to perform amongst I guess like what like group of people like between race and gender do you feel more pressure to perform a certain way? Is that a clear question?
What group, what race or gender,
Yeah, or both at the same time,
or
like
race and
white
gender?
people. Yeah, you
Mm,
feel more pressure to perform.
I feel like I don't really think so much gender. Um, I feel like for the most part, most jobs that I've had, the higher up you go, it's mainly white people. Um, and generally it's white men. Um, I've never really paid attention though to gender. Um, just because I personally don't feel allyship with white women or white men. You know what I mean? Like even with me and a white woman being women, our experiences are so vastly different. I'm like, it doesn't even matter, right? Like it doesn't even matter. Um, so I definitely feel like, I mean, I think to a certain extent, like it also depends on the role that I'm trying to occupy, right? Like if it's like, oh, you're gonna be a freelancer for BuzzFeed, like the way I'm pulling up like this, whether you're white, Chinese, blue, but if it's like, oh, I'm applying to be like district manager, you know what I mean? Like I do definitely feel like I have to a certain extent tone my personality down just because again, like I'm generally like straightforward. I'm very much like what you see is what you get, like I don't care. Um but I also feel like for jobs I've had, like this most recent one, I'm like my personality is an asset. I know how to connect with people, I'm relatable, I'm humorous, people like me. Like, what do you want? Like what do you want? So yeah, I feel like when you apply for a job to a certain extent, when you're working in a space as, even if you're not the only black woman, because I'm not the only black woman at my job. There's numerous black women, but I do feel like because there's like this like kind of like standing on eggshells, just like way that a lot of us have with jobs, with workspaces, um, you're just overall more careful, right? So even if I don't feel like, even if I'm not being performative, I am still like mentally like policing myself, right?
Right.
Like,
It's kind of like you're code switching.
I mean, yeah, exactly. Like, I feel like I always tell people I feel like I interview well. Um, like I'm never nervous for interviews. I'm not somebody who like normally like practices for interviews. Um,
Can't relate.
unless like a position that I'm like, oh my goodness, like. But I've never been in that position because I've always just kind of been like, whatever. Like if I get it, I get it. And if I don't, I don't. It's not for me. Um, I just kind of go in there. And I'm like, I'm gonna be myself, and they're either gonna love it or hate it. And I have yet to meet someone who's like, we hate it. Like I don't mean you apply to a job and get rejected. I mean like you get to the interview stage and they're like, we're gonna proceed. I've never had that happen. Like any interview I've been pulled in for, I've gotten. If I wanted it, I've gotten it. So yeah, I feel
What?
like no matter what, a certain amount of performance and policing is going to go into like existing in a workspace that's not predominantly black. Predominant, you know what I mean?
So, what, if any,
Mm.
aspect of your blackness do you feel is needs the most policing, or you perceive is the most frowned upon or threatened aspect of you, like of your specific blackness, or like not just your blackness, but like your blackness, your womanness, you like as a whole,
Right.
in the workspace? And which do you think is like the least, like the more accepted aspect of your blackness or your womanness?
So it's interesting because obviously right now I'm wearing a wig. But even when like I wore like I normally would wear like a puff, um, I was never really worried about my hair and how my hair was perceived. Um, I would honestly say my my tone. Um, Prior to getting a like I would say my tone, and at times it can be my expression. But I remember, and this is a side tangent, but it relates. Stay with me. I remember getting fake pulled over, and I say fake pulled over because he wasn't like behind me or anything. He was next to me, and he motioned. We were at a red light, and he motioned for me to roll my window down. So I did, and he's like, "You cut me off back there," and I'm like, "Okay, I was trying to get over. I had my blinker on." He's like, "Your blinker blinked like one time." He was like, "This is a white cop." He was like, if I was one of these new 22-year-old rookie cops with long hair, I'd pull you over and your insurance would be going all the way up. And I'm like, okay, well, I just recently moved here. I'm like, I was trying to get over. I'm using my GPS. I didn't want to miss my exit and be way put out. And I mean, depending on where you are in North Carolina, if you miss your exit, the way it will add 15 minutes to your whole commute, especially when you already don't know where you're going. I was like a relatively new driver. I was in my first car. So I said sorry to this cop like 3 or 4 times, and this motherfucker was not shutting up. I'm like, bro, you mean what do you want? What do you want? You want sexual favors? What do you want? Enough, enough. Like, so I say that to say sometimes like my kind of like you gonna like it or you're not attitude is conveyed like through my tone, and I think it kind of makes jobs like shaking their boots because they're like she's not gonna care, right? Like if she don't feel like doing it, she not gonna do it. Um, it almost makes me seem combative.
I was
And
gonna
I
say
actually,
that,
funnily
yeah.
enough, recently had a situation at my job where, and again, funnily enough, she's a black supervisor, and she was trying to tell me to do these things, and I was asking her like, what is the reason, like for what? And she tried to be like, oh, you're being insubordinate. Like I'm gonna tell like the manager, and I'm like, you do that. I look forward to speaking with her.
Or
You're mad because essentially you're just conveying messages to me and I want to know why. So then when I spoke to the manager, she's like, "Oh, I understand where you're coming from. Like you want to understand, you know, why you're receiving different directives and like you want to work in a way that's most effective for you. Like you weren't being, combative or whatever the case is." And I'm just like, and the manager is a white woman. Um, so honestly, I said that to say like this is why I say I suss people out because not all black women are like on your side. Like there's black women who ask us to get to the top and then they move weird, right? So I just was like, just because you say it doesn't mean I'm gonna do it. And when jobs like hear that or like they're like, oh, like what is a weakness that you have? Like what is a situation you could have handled differently? And you're like, honestly, like I don't really see weakness here. Like they be like, okay, like who does bitch think she is? Like, okay, Cleopatra, what's going on, right? But I feel like sometimes like having that demeanor, um, instead of it just being seen as like she's confident in like her employeeship, like I know for a good company, for a caring company, like I know how to do my job, right? You know what I mean? I know that I'm a good employee. So I'm not gonna be shit on by a corporation that's just like, oh this, oh that, and just like take it laying down, basically. Um, so if I had to say what aspect needs, not needs, but I police the most because I feel like it stands out the most is just my tone and like my demeanor. Um, because I know it can send the wrong message to someone who doesn't care to think past surface level. You know what I mean? Like if someone was like, oh, like if I was doing an interview and someone was like, the best part of me is my personality. Like how I am now is how I am all the time. That could be perceived two different ways, right? One, it could be like, okay, so like you don't adapt to situations, like you're just very much like this is what you're gonna get, like, oh well, like you don't care to like improve, or like you probably don't take constructive criticism well, right? Like it can be assumed that, or it can be assumed like this person is probably like a leader, like it gives leader energy, right? Like they're probably assertive, you know what I mean? They're probably a quick learner. They don't need like micromanaging and hand holding. You know, it could be perceived two different ways. And so I'm careful and aware, like, okay, this might be perceived a certain way.
So, what part of your blackness do you think is typically most accepted in the workspace?
Strangely enough, also my personality. Like I'll be like in like a chat on like a meeting or whatever, people like, oh my God, like Chanel, like I love you, like you're just so straightforward and to the point. And I'm like, you know what I mean? Like but then I mean that's also I feel like where like fetishizing comes into place, right? Like I've experienced this with dating where like if you have like a certain energy and you be thinking you and a man have chemistry and then you're like, wait, it's me. Like I am the chemistry. It is actually me. Like I'm the funny, witty one. Like I'm bringing the banter. Like you're actually boring on your own. Like if you pull back, you're like, oh shit, like I'm bringing the thunder. It's me, right? So with jobs, I feel like they'll be like, "Oh my God, like we love Chanel. Like she's just so straight to the point. Like she's straightforward. Like she gonna tell it how it is. You know what I mean? Like she's so funny. Like I can't stand her. Da 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 da. Right? I think honestly, it depends on the occupation. It depends on the space you're in. It depends on who is receiving that part of you and that part of your blackness. Right? Like because if I was in a meeting with senior leadership and they're all white and Indian, how I'm perceived won't be the same as like my coworkers who are white and Indian, right? Because they're also probably like in my age group. You know what I mean? Like it's so many things that factor into it. So again, it's all in perception. Like some people could perceive it as like, oh, like that dogginess about her, I just do not like. And some people are like that is my favorite part about her.
Were there any other things that you want to discuss about like the workplace or the experiences that Black women uniquely face in either in the workspace or any kind of like professional or laborsome activity or area?
Um, excuse me, just because this is something like recent, I'd probably say like how we have to navigate voicing like complaints, like how honest we can be. Like you ever get like a company survey and they're like, oh, like make sure you fill out the engagement survey, like make sure you fill out the satisfaction survey. I never fill those out because I'm like, you're not gonna track my little IP and email address down and hook, line, and sinker me. I'm on to you, Julia. I'm on to you, baby. Like, no, you're not gonna trace that back to me. And I was like, we want you to be as honest as possible so we can get better. But again, like I just don't trust that it won't come back and bite me in the ass. Um, so there's times where like my supervisor is like, the upper management, like throw a meeting on your calendar with them and meet with them and explain like your qualms or like your concerns. No,
Like, oh,
I'm not
okay
gonna do
then.
that. That doesn't feel safe, right?
Yeah, okay, sure.
So, right. I'll do that. Yeah, and never do, and never do. So navigating speaking to, especially if your senior leadership or your higher ups aren't black people, because even when they are, I feel like even when they are, so for example, one of our higher, not, it's hard to explain. She's up there. She's a black woman. But then it's almost like to me how I imagine like cognizant, self-aware, emotionally intelligent like black cops are, right? Like they understand the the mistrust and the pain, right? And the history. They get it. So they're like, yeah, this is my profession. But as a black person, like I'm occupying, it's like a dichotomy, right? It's like, I call it like double minority. Um, but like, you're like, okay, like I'm in this space where like I'm viewed this way, but I'm also still black. So I feel like to a certain extent, yes, she's a black woman. So it's like, okay, like, is she an ally? Because I'm also a black woman. Can I trust her? But at the same time, it's like, okay, how much weight do you really have when you're in a room with those other white people, right? And if it's you or me, you're gonna pick you, right? So it's like, it's really touchy. Um, have you had to have you like Kris had to have difficult or like hard conversations with like your managers or even above your managers as far as like expressing like your displeasure with something or like even you just being hesitant about being honest, be it in like leaving a review or like filling out a survey or like even like not being honest when your manager asks you something because you're like either you feel like this is not going to be resolved regardless or I'm going to look like a bitching and moaning black woman. You know what I mean?
I'm trying to think.
I need to get my eyebrows done.
Hmm. There have been times where, because like I was saying earlier, most of my managers,
Mm,
it hasn't like been that vibe. Because it's been clear that I would easily be able to be friends with them outside of work. They're just those kind of people. They're not just like
right.
employees or managers or coworkers. They're solid people.
Mm,
But I, I'm trying to, because again, like I feel like I've mostly been like protected from like a lot of that stuff.
okay.
Mm, I feel like there's something on top of my head.
Like, are there even I don't want to interrupt you, but I also like don't want you to feel like pressure or like dead air. Um, or like even times when it's like you'll see something in the Slack, or like you'll hear something in like a meeting and you're hesitant, like you want to respond or reply, but you're hesitant to because you're like, okay, I don't want this to be perceived this way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what the subject is and if there really is no way to educate them without hurting their feelings. Not
Yeah.
because there's no way to educate them without being rude, but there's
Right.
no way to educate them in a way
Mm,
where their feelings are taken into consideration. Um, and usually I'll just let it be because I'm
mm,
thinking, hmm, I'm being paid for this kind of energy to be
yeah.
exerted in this kind of way during these kind of hours. Checking you, I don't get paid for that.
Yeah.
And also like at my company, I know there are like higher up black people who are I don't even know like how like what analogy to use, but who like I know like are there and who are watching and will like talk to leadership. Not saying it's an easy thing for
Yeah.
them to do. Um, And like, I mean, there are examples, but I don't want to like be too specific.
Right,
Um,
right.
and I think again, it just depends on what the subject is.
Right.
So y'all might like get to know this about me as time goes on, but I am a person who I am not really too reactive or like emotionally responsive unless I am presently being stimulated by that thing. Which sounds kind of weird, but hmm, if someone like says something that is just like whatever to me, even if it annoys me, if I don't think it's that important and it doesn't really like hit a nerve,
Mm,
then it's usually easier for me to like pass it on. But when it's certain things, like stuff related to race or like gender, like socio-political things, that's usually where I will stop code switching. I'll still be mindful, but the way I would be mindful 5 seconds ago, it's not the way I'm being mindful now. So I remember there was a time around the George Floyd protests, um, and my company on our monthly company wide meeting, they like have a slide deck and everything. And at the beginning of the slide deck, they had a slide that said Black Lives Matter. And so if you were any kind of alive or cognizant between 2012 and beyond, for most of the 2010s at least, you would know that 10 years ago, saying Black Lives Matter probably would have gotten you like sent to HR. It was considered to be like terrorist, and people still think this, but it's a lot more like cool and like flashier now, and more so just being like it's
right,
more acceptable to say it.
right.
Um, and so by that point in 2020, it wasn't really there yet. So even I was surprised when I saw that because I was like, for real? I didn't know we were allowed to say that at work. Cool. And leadership in my company is white, so it wasn't even like on some that's what I expected. But anyway, so I think they addressed it or whatever. Um and I don't really trust leadership for different reasons from things I've heard,
Mm,
nothing directly to me, but um people were like coming off me because they were like, if anyone wants to like share or say anything, feel free to. And a lot of people were saying like thank you and it means a lot and stuff. And I was just annoyed by that. So I was like, mm-mm, we're not, we're actually not about to praise y'all for doing the bare fucking minimum. And so I remember saying, I just went off mute because I think you have like a little raise your hand option on Zoom.
yeah.
So, they're like, all right, Kris, go ahead. I was like, yeah, thank you. I think that's like really impactful. Like, I don't think many of us were like expecting that. I don't think like too many companies, have been saying that. But this is before like I would know that moving forward it would be a thing. Um, and I was saying, I said something like saying Black Lives Matter is not enough. Using hashtags is not enough. The work exists beyond this meeting.
Hmm.
And I would also encourage my non-Black peers during this time and beyond all times to make sure you're utilizing your own private resources because around this time, Black people are not,
Yeah.
and in general, we're not, but especially around these kind of times, we are not here to be your educators, even if we are
Yeah.
in the spotlight and you want to get to like learn how to be a better ally and stuff. I think I said verbatim, Google is a free resource. Now I said all that like very shortly. I think I can't remember exactly what I said, but all that to say like it really depends on in what way I am triggered. If you
Mm,
say something to me that's like a little smart or that kind of has me like, okay, I just want to share that part of me with you. Like I'm not, I don't do the back and forth shit. Like I think I
yeah.
told you last night. Like the way I will not fucking argue, I will just walk the fuck away.
Right.
But if you say anything out of term, anything like out of turn from your privilege, from your experience, it's a different fucking side of me. I cannot
I
help
gotta
it.
leak, I gotta leak Chris audios from her talking about Lawrence and Insecure, calling Issa a hoe. When I tell you I was like doubled over in my kitchen in tears, like I just had to say that because
I,
yeah, I mean, and for the most part, like I think Chris does a really good job of like tastefully saying something, right? Like especially like in the workspace. I mean, if it's like she's like somebody on social media like saying something wayward and she's just like you look like a shrimp anyway, done. You know, whatever the case is. But um I think she does a really good job of like because I'm somebody who when I'm pissed, I'm just gonna say what I have to say and I don't care how you receive it. Or I'm just gonna shut down and not say anything. But there's times where I'll be talking to her and I'll say something and she'll word it in a way that I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna send exactly what you said. And I wouldn't have been able to do it on my own because I'm already like worked up. So I do think that she does a really good job of um saying what has to be said without like being nasty about it, which is, believe it or not, a skill. Um, it really is. Like it's a skill because when I'm already worked up, I can't.
I want to add like another layer of nuance to that as well. And thank you for the compliments. So part of why I will also toy that line, depending on what it is. Again, like if
Right.
how I was saying earlier, when the Indian woman was like, "Oh, how do I talk to my daughter about police brutality, or not even police brutality, but
Yeah.
like how to interact with the cops and stuff."
Yeah.
I didn't say anything. I was just like, I'm muting all these fucking channels. Y'all are getting on my nerve because I'm like,
Right.
y'all are over here trying to figure out how to be woke, how to be a good ally and stuff. And you're not
Mm,
considering that while you're flooding every single channel on a work thread, in a work Slack group or whatever, you're still exposing Black people to the trauma that we
yes.
are always faced with. So shut the fuck up.
Yep. Shut up.
Anyway, that's a side tangent. But part of like why I will toe that line when it actually
Mm,
is something that one irritates the fuck out of me and falls under a certain category, um, is because I learned like in college, and it's been in my mind ever since, that because of certain phenotypes of mine, um, I'm able to get away with saying things a little more bluntly, and it be received a certain way, as opposed to someone who looks a bit different than me and says it in a way nicer way than I would have. So like because I am light skinned, because I like am like smaller and shorter and everything, and I'm like I
yeah.
would say like I'm pretty feminine. All that to say, like I'm not too like visibly threatening for most people. Usually,
Yeah.
people who are threatened by me are
That's
white
a
women,
good
but
point.
that's not my business. But so usually, like I, in a lot of aspects, am this acceptable version of Black, at least like within non-Black spaces and even in Black spaces. Um, but there are people who might have blacker features than me, who might be bigger than me, might have
Right.
more masculine presentation than me, who might be darker
Yeah.
than me. And they could have all of that and have the softest, sweetest voice.
Right.
But because of how they look, the code switching I have to do is not the level of code switching that they have to do. So
Very
I'm
true.
thinking the level of discomfort that I feel in this moment, or fear that I feel with speaking up, is nowhere near the level of discomfort my peer who legit can't say shit.
Yeah.
It's not. So that's just the fucking risk that you have to take. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, and I know that. So that's also why I'm like who are you gonna fucking check? Who are you gonna
Yeah.
fucking check? It's like when like, and this is not a good analogy, but like when white women, I can't think of a good example, like in a positive light. I know they've done it in a positive light, but I can't. I can't think of a good example. So on the negative side, with like the stereotype of white women, is how they weaponize their perceived fragility, and like their
Mm,
white tears. I have seen them do it for good, but I cannot think of an actual example. I know they have, but it's like that where um, I'm going to weaponize this and use it the
yeah.
fuck against you. So I'll say like that, like yeah, like I will be tactful, but the thing is like usually I'm not being that fucking nice. I think it's usually because like I'm pretty quiet and I don't say shit.
Right.
Um, and I'm just very funny about my words in general. Like I'd rather be like you, where I just say whatever the fuck is on my mind. But I
Yeah.
also know that if I do that, I usually say some really mean shit. It's only happened a couple times, but I know. I was like, yeah, I still got to filter myself.
Not too much.
But yeah, so yeah, I think there's definitely like um, a layer there that should be acknowledged.
Okay. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I'm trying to think. I feel like I had a question from earlier and I cannot remember um, what it was. It could maybe just be like an ending question that we answer another time when I think of it, even though it's like related to work. But besides that, I don't have anything extra. Do you?
Okay. I don't. I don't
Okay.
have anything related to work. Um, but do you want to discuss? I mean, we're kind of going toward two. We could do the next episode. We could do the next episode.
Okay. Are you talking? What are you
Yeah.
talking about?
The review.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, we can do that another time. Can we still close off with the reflex card?
We can.
Okay. So
It's
this is
gone.
another box. Huh? It's
You
it's
have a
gone.
corn can?
So this is apparently another box that I have not opened.
Oh my
So yeah,
God.
I thought I had opened all three of them, but apparently not. So this is a cute little pink and green situation, y'all. Very
Yes.
colorful. So do you want me to answer a card first, or do you want to answer a card first?
I feel like I normally do.
Yeah, you do.
But yeah, you can just like flip them. I don't know if you want to hold it up and I can read it to you.
Okay, this stack, like which stack? This one, the middle one, or this one?
Let's do the middle.
Okay.
My skin is probably
Wait, fuck, I
dry.
messed it up. Oh my god, I don't remember
Oh
which
my
one
God,
was the middle.
Chris.
Okay, I'll just use this one.
Okay.
Okay. I'll just keep shuffling it and tell me when to stop, and whatever shows up in the front, you'll just read.
Okay.
Stop.
Stop.
Okay. All right. Here you go.
What's the worst way someone could describe you?
Damn. Um, kind of depends on the person, because kind of how we were saying, like the way I will react around certain people will kind of vary.
Right.
Um, the worst way someone could describe me. I'm trying to think if that means like in the meanest way or in the most inaccurate way.
Mm.
Mm,
I mean, either or both.
yeah. So I think, in short, the worst way you could describe me is in a polarizing way, where it's like it's not
Mm.
very nuanced. It's either this or that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that is also going to depend on what mood I'm in and how safe I feel when you initially meet me, or as you continue to
Right.
interact with me. So some people might see me and say like, "Oh yeah, Christina, she is the sweetest person. She is just so nice and bubbly and funny. I love her." Whereas other people might be like, "Well, she's kind of reserved. She doesn't really speak up during meetings and
Right.
everything." So I think any of those, while in some regard they are true, It's the
Yeah.
fact that they're not true all the time. So I feel like the worst way to describe me as a general like vibe or like
Yeah.
manner to do it would be it just being very this
Boxed in.
or
Yeah.
that. I would say like the most inaccurate way to describe me is I would say the most inaccurate way to describe me is to say that I'm like unaware. That's the dumbest thing someone could ever say
Yeah.
to me. Like
Yeah.
like anyone who knows me be like, Kris is unaware? Okay. Okay. Your time, Kris. Uh, yeah. I would say that. Um
Okay.
yeah. Or if a guy was like, you have an attitude, I'm like, the way I don't. So
Right.
yeah, certain things it's like I'm like that has nothing to do with me, but thank you. I
Yeah.
have a lot of insecurities about how I am as a person. Having an attitude is not one of them, but thank you.
Right. Right.
All right.
Thanks for your input.
So I'm gonna do one. Oh my god, it's getting so dark. What time is it?
I know, that's what I
7.
said.
Okay. What do you wish you knew before becoming an adult? Reflex, reflex, reflex.
I right. How much unlearning I'd have to do to
Mm,
just be like a halfway decent person and function,
mm,
honestly. Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of becoming an adult is like unpeeling like a banana. Um, because if you think about it, when you become an adult, you're born again. You know what I mean? To in a certain extent, like it's not like your parents kind of like indoctrinating you anymore, or like telling you like how to feel and like who to be. Um, like literally when I left the coop and went to college, it was like, you know, when a baby comes out, like that like gasp. That's
yeah.
what it's like because it's like, okay, like damn, like I'm really out here. Like I gotta make my own decisions. I gotta pave my own path. Um, and then as you kind of get older, you realize that certain things that suited you as a child don't suit you as an adult anymore. Certain things that kept you safe, you know, and like protected and like just mentally and physically as a child, like don't work anymore when you're an adult, right?
Hmm.
So that would be my answer. How much unlearning I'd have to do. Because again, like I'm almost
Yeah.
30 and I feel like there's so much for me to unpack um, and chisel away at. Um, so yeah, that'll be my answer.
It's interesting thinking of it that way because childhood and youth is always understood as this phase of life where you're meant to be curious, where you're meant to learn a bunch. And then it's like
Right.
you do all that learning just to
Yeah.
then do the opposite as an adult because y'all taught us very bad things or you missed a lot of stuff.
Right. Right. Simple.
That honestly could be like its own podcast topic. I like that question.
Yeah, honestly, truly. Because don't get me wrong, there are some things you probably learn as a child that, and there are certain ways that children are that I feel like would serve us as adults. Like kids just doing stuff because it feels good. Like as adults, like how often do we just being like, like you don't want to do that 12 times in a row for no reason. Or like when like you got like a buzz cut and you're like, and you flip nothing, but it just feels good.
Hmm.
So, I mean, which to a certain extent, like I remember seeing this thing that was like, we all STEM, right? Like people think like, oh, like kids with autism, but like as adults, like we also do the same thing. There's times I'll do something and I'll do it over and or like when you like have a Chris does this a lot. She'll like have a TikTok sound in her head and like literally like she could be in a bed asleep, but she'll like and like say the line. Like literally like the line will have her in a chokehold for like a week. She'll like send me 18 videos with the same sound over and over. Like it's like she's like in it. But you're just doing it because it feels good and your brain is telling you to do it. So I feel like
No, right.
just like that, like children have a certain like naivety that we as adults kind of like let go of. Um, so I do think there are things like from our childhood selves that we should hold on to and keep. But I feel like it's the same way with like criticism. Like take what applies and let the rest fly, right? So there are things that I feel like I've picked up in childhood that don't apply anymore. So shedding that as an adult is it's a complicated experience, especially, I mean, imagine a coat that you've been wearing for 17 years. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like a part of you. And it's almost like stuck to your skin and you haven't like unpeel it off. It's going to be painful. It's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to feel like bald and naked and your skin is going to feel raw. But like, you have to do it. So you don't have to. I'm sure there's people walking around with horrible toxic traits, but you want to be like again a halfway decent adult functioning society, like you kind of aim to do that. So
Right. All right. Well, that's how we always end our episodes. We hope you all enjoyed
yeah.
this. We know it was kind of long, very like stream of consciousness. I think topics like these can honestly just be discussed for a very long time. But like even as we continue to discuss these kind of topics or even
Mm,
more topics that are like even more nuanced than this, I think
yeah.
we'll get even better at like making the point we want to make.
Yeah.
But regardless, I hope you all enjoyed this. I hope you were able to follow this. Um, and I hope you all have a good rest of your week, which will be in a week for us.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, that's crazy.
so yeah, until we get feedback otherwise, I think we'll just continue to post on Wednesdays.
Yeah.
Usually they post around 8 a.m. I try to schedule them for that, but Wednesday sometime. So yeah, we hope you enjoyed that, and we have many more topics planned over the upcoming weeks. But if you guys want to hear anything specific or just want to hear us explore a topic a little bit more than we
Yeah.
did in a previous podcast, just let us know and we can touch on that. But yeah, we're always open to new ideas. So
Yeah.
um, I I think anytime we close off, I just want you to do it because I can't. I'm so bad at it.
So we
Like,
are Brown Babes Field Notes. We are on multiple platforms. I don't know if you're listening on Anchor or Apple Podcasts. We're also on Stitcher. We're on YouTube. We have an Instagram. We're just kind of starting to get the hang of like posting and stuff like this. We're not a teen anymore. We're our own editing. We're our own marketing team. Chris is like fading into the shadows because it got darker in her end. But I'm your half of Brown Bay Field Notes. I'm Chanel.
and I am the other half. I am Kris.
And we will see y'all next episode.
Have a good one, y'all. Bye.
Bye.